Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving deep into one of the most crucial numbers for any business's health, gross margin. We're going to break down what it is, why it matters so much, and how it tells the real story behind a company's sales numbers.
All right, so let's kick things off with a puzzle, a real head-scratcher that gets a surprising number of people. You see a company and its sales are just going through the roof, but somehow it's still losing money. How on earth is that possible? Well, this isn't some trick question. It's a very common reality for businesses that don't understand one key metric.
And the answer means you have to look past that big, flashy revenue number. You see, it's not really about how much you sell. It's about how much you keep after you pay for the direct costs of making the stuff you sold. That is the true heart of a company's profitability.
And that brings us right to our first building block, gross profit. This is the very first stop on the road from revenue to actual bottom-line profit.
So gross profit is just a simple dollar amount. Think about it like this. You sell a t-shirt for, say, 20 bucks. It costs you $8 to actually make the shirt and get it ready. Your gross profit is $12. That's the money left on the table to pay for everything else. Rent, marketing, salaries, you name it.
But to even figure out that gross profit number, you first have to get your head around one of the most important acronyms in the entire business world, COGS.
COGS. It stands for cost of goods sold, and it's pretty much exactly what it sounds like. It's all the costs that are directly tied to producing the actual things you sell. You know, if you didn't sell a single thing, you wouldn't have these costs.
Okay, so this is the really critical part, knowing what goes in the COGS bucket and what stays out. So the raw materials for a car, the wages of the people on the assembly line putting it together, absolutely, that's COGS. But what about the rent for the corporate headquarters? Or that huge TV ad campaign? The CEO's salary? Nope, none of that is COGS. That all falls into a different category called operating expenses. All right, let's clear up something that often confuses people but is absolutely essential to understanding a company's health. And that's the difference between gross profit and gross margin.
So, like we just said, gross profit is a hard number, a concrete dollar figure. It's the 12 bucks you made on that t-shirt. And that's useful, for sure, but it doesn't tell you the whole story, especially when you want to compare how you're doing.
Gross margin, on the other hand, is always a percentage. And this, my friends, is where the real insight is. It takes that raw dollar amount and turns it into this incredibly powerful ratio that tells you just how efficient a company is. And the formula itself is super simple, but don't let that fool you. You take your gross profit, that's your revenue minus your COGS, and you just divide it by your total revenue. What you get is the percentage of every single dollar in sales that the company keeps before paying for all those other expenses.
So let's make it real. Say a business brings in $200,000 in sales, and it spent $100,000 on its COGS. The gross profit is a nice round 100 grand, but the gross margin is 50%. And that tells a story. For every dollar that comes in the front door, 50 cents is left over to cover everything else and, hopefully, become profit.
Seriously, you should think of gross margin like a vital sign for a business, like its pulse or its blood pressure. It's a fundamental indicator of how efficiently that company is turning its raw materials and its labor into actual profit.
So, that leads to the big question, right? What's a good number? Is 20% good? Is 80% amazing? Well, the answer is, it totally depends. It is completely different for every industry. And what's so fascinating is just how wide the range is. I mean, look at software companies. They're averaging over a 71% gross margin. And that kind of makes sense, right? You build the software once, and then you can sell it over and over again with very little direct cost for each new customer. Now compare that to a grocery store, which sits around 25%, or a car manufacturer at just over 12%. For them, every single sale means buying a physical thing or a whole bunch of expensive parts. So a 71% margin is fantastic for a software company, but a 25% margin for a grocery chain is perfectly healthy. Context is absolutely everything.
And this is exactly why those industry benchmarks are so important. There was this athletic wear startup, for example, that discovered its gross margin was only 10.5%. When they saw how low that was compared to their competitors, it was like a giant red flag. It told them loud and clear their pricing was way off. Okay, so once you know your number, what can you actually do about it? If your margin isn't where it needs to be, what are the levers you can pull to make things better?
It really comes down to 3 basic moves. First, you can cut your COGS, your direct costs. Second, you can adjust your pricing. And third, you can get more efficient in your operations to cut down on waste.
And each of those levers has specific tactics. You can go negotiate harder with your suppliers. You can tell your sales team to focus on selling the products that have the highest margins. Or you can get smarter about managing your inventory so you're not wasting money. Every one of these things directly helps your gross margin.
And check this out. This quote from McKinsey brilliantly shows the power of that pricing lever. They found that just a tiny 1% price increase can lead to an 8% jump in operating profits. It just goes to show how sensitive your bottom line can be to even small, smart changes in pricing.
But we have to end with a really crucial piece of the bigger picture here. Gross margin is all about the profitability of your main operation, making and selling your product. But it is not the final word. The real bottom line is net margin. That's what's left after all the other bills, rent, marketing, taxes, everything are paid. And that takes us full circle, right back to our puzzle from the beginning. Can a business have a fantastic, healthy gross margin and still go under? You bet it can. If its operating costs are totally out of control, a great gross margin won't save it. A high gross margin gives you a fighting chance for sure, but it doesn't guarantee you'll win the game. Which really makes you wonder, what else has to be managed just right for a business to truly succeed?